No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, after our last episode on Monday titled, "Is Your Apprehension of a Post-Pandemic World Preventing You from Leading in the Way Your People Need?" we got a lot of really great feedback about that episode. A lot of people saying that it resonated with them, saying that, you're speaking to some of the fears that I have, some of the things that I've been dealing with right now. I think I got probably half a dozen Instagram DMs and a few emails as well. Just it seemed to really kind of touch a chord with some people. Did you kind of get that too?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people talking about that episode and really, I think so many people are in the same boat right now, which is, doing the absolute best to lead teams and lead people, but also to lead ourselves and think about what does the future look like and, how do we kind of get into this mindset of making sure that we continue to develop, and that way we're able to offer development to our people, regardless of what ends up happening over the next, 6 months, 12 months to 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of characterize that episode as talking about the things that we used to do that will never return, like the things that we're changing now that even after COVID is a distant memory, a lot of these things will never return. And that got us thinking kind of about this idea of, well, what things will never go away? And when you're looking at a situation like a post-pandemic world and things are in upheaval and all these things have to change, sometimes I know for me, speaking personally, I can get a lot of a feeling of grounding to think about the things that aren't changing or that aren't going away, kind of anchors that I put myself to. And so for the next 5 episodes, we're going to be going through 5 things that we think aren't going to go away, regardless of what happens with COVID or the future or afterward. And I think this is a kind of a really cool way for listeners to kind of ground themselves as well and think, all right, well, yes, a lot of things are changing, but at the end of the day, a lot of things are still really going to stay the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important to think about is there are some things and some tenets of leadership and things that, no matter how long they've been around, they always seem to find a place to live because they are really, truly things that you can continue to do no matter what the circumstances are. And there are a lot of things that, continue to evolve and change. And so I think it's always important to center ourselves as leaders in making sure that we are focused on the big things and the things that tend to always be there for us when we need them and when our teams need them.
Yeah, totally agree. So for this first week, we're going to talk about the fact that people will always need to feel a connection to their leaders and to their organization. I've thought this for the longest time. I think that employees who have this feeling of connection, they are more engaged and more productive in their work. I don't think that's changing now with COVID than versus before. I just think it's harder for leaders to make that happen now. What do you think?
Well, I don't know that necessarily that it's harder to be connected. It's funny because, I talk about this all the time, is like so many times we talk about leadership and things that people struggle with and how do you fix this and how do you get better at that? And we always kind of feel like, we're hitting the little sample board. It's like, get to know your people, get to know your people, get to know your people, right? And but it's funny, but it's so true. And I think that what's changed over the years is that getting to know your people means something different now than it did 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Get to know your people was the old Simpson, like, what's your name? Do you have a spouse? What are your children's names? Right? Sure. You know what I mean? Like, it was the very basics of getting to know your people versus today, which means like, is the work that you're doing as a leader around what your people are trying to achieve in their personal and professional life? And to be able to answer that question, you really got to know your people, and as a leader, if you have a large team or you're a leader of leaders, obviously it becomes difficult to really get to know all of your people on that individual basis, but then you have to find leaders on your team that have that same value structure and are willing to put in the time, the effort to get to know the people and to know what's going on in their life and to know what they're looking to achieve, and also to know like what are they struggling with or what are they working on, and when are things happening and when are they showing up as not themselves. But like, there's a lot of that EQ, soft skills that are really, really necessary and relevant right now. And I think, even if the shift goes into the virtual world, It's really weird. I don't remember if we were talking about this on our show or a different show. And obviously, you and I have both been doing a lot of interviews with a lot of people, whether
Sure.
we're guests on a podcast or they're guests on our podcast. But I was talking about like everybody's saying it's more difficult to connect with people in the virtual world while we look at somebody's camera into their home. You know what I mean? Like just stop and think about that for a second. You're like, it's so hard to get to know who they are while I have a camera pointed in their home. Like,
Right.
we've been forced to kind of like open up in this space and open up to what's in our background and what do we do. And it's created a lot of questions and jokes and things like that. And like, you know, I've talked about, we're in a unique situation where we podcast and we do it a lot and we do it over camera and we both do it in rooms that are kind of set up for podcasting and have cool stuff in the background. So what ends up happening when I put my camera on, probably same as you, people are like, what's all that? What do you have back there? What
Sure.
You got guitars on your wall. You got all these types of cool things. So I just think that while yes, going virtual is a little bit of a hurdle, and we've all struggled with it, and I've struggled with it. I'm like, this is so weird. I'm used to like jokes, and you know, like we talked about the nuances and the little stuff that you're normally used to having. You can figure out a way to make that happen in the virtual world. You just have to have more intent. And I think that for me is what I've been wrapping my head around with recently is like, how can you add intent to making sure that you're connecting people regardless if you're in the same room or you have a camera into their home?
Yeah, I'll totally agree with that one. I will say that like anything in life, this is easier for people who made an effort before this happened too, right?
Get to know your people.
Get
right?
to know your people, yeah. So if all you had in the get to know your people was whether or not they were married and whether or not they had kids and whether, you know, all the kind of surface level things, I think those kind of connections lead to, you know, a little bit more awkwardness when you try to seem like you're making an effort over a Zoom call to get to know your people. It's definitely much easier if the person is someone who you shoot the breeze with all the time and just talk and you talk like whether you're sitting at a bar next to each other or at the office or wherever you are. If you have that kind of candor or relationship with a person, then this is nothing. This is just changing the how, but the what is still there. The feeling is still there. But quite honestly, there are a lot of people listening right now, and there are a lot of leaders out there who didn't have that level of connection with their people, and that doesn't mean they just get to go, I guess I don't get to connect now, or I guess it's going to be awkward. No, you still have to make an effort. So for those leaders that are listening and thinking, yeah, you know what, I really didn't make that effort, and it's fine, it is what it is. I still want to move forward, I still want to engage them, and I still want to see productivity out of them, and I feel like they're not doing what I need them to do because I almost haven't earned the right to ask them to do that from anywhere besides whatever my position is. And that's a very real fear. And so a lot of it, I think, just comes down to owning the mistake, owning the lack of connection prior to it. It's not even a mea culpa moment. It's just kind of like hey, you know what? I was just thinking that the last conversations we had, you know, before we were all shut down, back when we were in the office together, they were, you know, we were fine. We've always gotten along, but it was really superficial. And I'm feeling like I did a disservice to you and to us by not taking that time to get to know you. So what I would love is, if you don't mind, can I tell you a little bit about me? Like, I'm not going to ask you anything. Let me tell you about me. Let me tell you what's important to me and what's dear to me. And I think a lot of leaders, by showing that vulnerability of saying, this is what's important, these are my hopes and dreams and fears, so to speak, I think you will start to get people open up to you, but you have to trust them first at this point if this is the position you find yourself in.
Yeah, it's almost like a little bit laughable. Like as you were talking about that to begin with, I was thinking about like the leaders that maybe are so disconnected or have put like zero effort into any of that relationship building. Like, could you imagine if we had to be on like a WebEx or something, and like, you know, your wife walks into the frame and I'm like, oh, who's that? And you're like, oh, it's my wife, Shannon. And I'm like, oh, you're married? like
right.
Oh,
right.
I thought maybe you had a roommate.
Right.
Like just to be completely oblivious to the things in people's life. But here's the scary part. Like, that's probably happened.
Sure.
There are probably people listening to the show right now that were like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what happened to me. Something happened while I was on a call or a WebEx, and somebody was like, oh, I had no idea that you were into this. And it's like, it speaks to that. So I think that like you're spot on. Like you, either you've put forth the effort, like you always should have. And as usual, as a leader, if you are willing to own your mistake, if you are willing to say, hey, look, I'm going to call this out. I've not done a good job with this, and I apologize. Like I should have done better, and I want to do better, and I'm going to do better. And so, like, we're going to start with this today, and we're gonna get, like, if you are willing to do that for yourself and for your people, you can get a lot of grace, and a lot of people will appreciate that, and they will at least give you the opportunity.
What that story made me think of is if you're a leader and you're not seeing these things happen from your people, like the example you gave of, my wife walking in the background or something like that. If you're seeing nothing, if it's this kind of cleansed environment on your Zoom calls, then that is a very good litmus test for whether or not there's some kind of connection. Because I have been on calls in organizations that I consult for where there are people on the call holding a baby in their arms. I've been on calls where women are nursing babies, on calls where you hear kids screaming in the background, and they'll say, just ignore them. They're going to kill each other, but whatever, I'll make new ones. Where it's that level of like candor and kind of like this acknowledgement that, I am not this kind of put together thing that you are used to seeing in the office. I was when I was in the office, but now you're in my home. And if you're in my home, you need to understand that I did not turn my home into work. I am doing work at home. And so there should be a natural bleed over that you're seeing in these calls if you're a leader. If you're not seeing that, I would think about whether or not your people feel comfortable actually being themselves.
Yeah, well, you make me feel a lot better about having crazy hip hop artwork and guitars and like tennis shoes I've never worn in my background, because you're spot on. You're absolutely right. It's kind of like if I wasn't comfortable being who I am. And when people would pop on my camera, so many people were like, well, that's exactly what I expected. Literally, like, that's exactly what I would expect to have at your house, right? With all the things that you're into and what you talk about. But I think that's a great point, is that it's very much a reflection, how people show up in the virtual world is also a reflection of how they feel comfortable showing up in the real world. Like last Thursday's Thoughtful Thursday, and I talked about the article that I had read on HBR around your leadership origin story and the lens in which you see that. And it really hit home for me, because I never really considered that. It's like, when you talk about how you became a leader, how does that actually speak to how you lead people? And I was like, man, that's a great call out, because that lens of how you explain leadership is maybe it's a subconscious way of how you believe leadership is supposed to be.
Right.
And it was really, really interesting, but I thought it was cool because it was one of those things where it's like, reflect and write it down and consider it, think about it, and then how do you make sure that how you talk about yourself and your leadership origin is aligned with how you are as a leader? Well,
yeah, I mean, we've known for years that story sells, right? And we say sells almost like you're trying to like sell something. You're not trying to sell anything, but you're trying to sell yourself, and you're trying to say that you have credibility behind what you are trying to do. And I don't care who you are, you don't have credibility behind anything you're trying to do, even if you're right, unless you can tie it back to why you got there. What did you go through in your life that led you to these thoughts or these beliefs or this system of beliefs? If you can at least tie it back to that, I might disagree with you, but at least I can say, okay, it's rooted in experience. So that either my job is to either help this person get more experience, maybe they can adjust that, maybe they can think differently, I can give them new perspective, or I can learn from their experience and learn something myself. But when you start from a standpoint of just saying, okay, this is what my beliefs are, and you don't ground it in anything, I think that level of being able to tell that story, that is what connection is all about. You have to start with that storytelling, because the connection we need to feel to each other is an emotional connection. When we say people need to feel connection, I don't mean they need more time on the Zoom call. People need to feel connection, meaning they need to feel a desire to be there in the first place. If you're creating Zoom calls with your team and 90% of them doesn't have their camera on, they're talking, you can hear them, they don't have the camera, they don't feel comfortable with you being in their life. That should say something to you. If you haven't shared your stories, if they haven't shared their stories, you don't have that connection yet, and that connection needs to happen if you want to be able to expect any level of performance out of them when we're in a remote environment.
I think it's a great point. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, if you're a leader and you find yourself thinking that maybe the connection you have with your team isn't as strong as you think it should be based on what you've heard here today, what I want you to do is think about the next time that you're going to be on a virtual call or a video call with your team. Not just a single person, though it could work with a single person, but if you have a lot of people kind of watching, as the leader, as the person facilitating the call, take a moment to share something about your personal life and about you with your team that they might not know. And here's what I mean by that. If it means getting up and walking around with your laptop so that they can take a virtual tour of wherever you live with you, then do that. If you can show them, your dog walking around in the background, or your children or your spouse in the background doing whatever they're doing, if your spouse is on a different computer in a different office doing their virtual work from home, whatever that is that says, hey, you know what? I'm letting you in my home right now. Now, if there are 80 empty beer bottles on the table, clean that stuff up. But don't pristine the house up. Don't make it look like a museum in there. This is who you are. And you want to make sure people don't look at it and go, oh, they knew they were going to do this. They made the house perfect for me so that I wouldn't see anything bad. Just be you, because the goal here isn't to show them the house or what's going on in the background. The goal is to make them feel like you're opening up and you're trying to get a sense of connection with them. Start there and see what kind of people open up tech to you.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. And as usual, as leaders, you need to be a role model to the behaviors and to the environment. And if you're looking to create a better connection with your people and you're looking to learn more about them, then you should open up yourself and share a little bit more about you. And I love the point about just be you and don't put on an act. You know what I mean? Just it is what it is. And have some fun and, pull the guitar off the wall if you've got one, or, show off your collection of things that you collect, or like whatever it is. Show them what it is that you do and what you have passions for, and what are the things that you have that make you happy and bring you joy at home. And I think that will be reciprocated, from your team completely.
I agree. And I can't stress it enough. Don't be fake about any of it. None of it. Don't embellish anything. Don't try to impress anybody. Just be you. I promise you they will see through it. They will see through whatever facade you're trying to put on. If you're not ready to be just kind of transparent, you're not ready to do this yet. So once you can get there, that's when you should do it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.